Everybody wanted to say it's.
As you came in,
Just say it's a Matthew.
there's a glossary. It is beneficial.
Oh, we want to say.
There are 3 handouts as you come in. The first is a glossary that will help you with some of the less familiar terms. The second is a scorecard. We'll be doing this on the slides as we go through, but if you would like to keep your own track, you may score things a little differently than I do.
I didn't see that second item back in the page.
It's on
It
the
is.
top of the back table. It's at the top of it.
And the third, as I was going through, I ran across lots of treats. So the third is just a sheet of recipes for the season. So welcome. I guess I'm not getting an introduction. I am Matthew Baugh. I work for this church. I'm the associate pastor. And Jim asked me a few weeks ago, he said that this was a topic that you guys were interested in doing. And it's something that's been an interest of mine for some time. So I was happy to do it. I have
And I think
been,
every 7 years, does the date line up exactly with October 31st? Sunday.
okay, I didn't know that. I have seen a thing on Facebook that says this year, Halloween will fall on Friday the 13th, and it only happens once every 500 years. I actually think it happens much less often than that, like never. People like to have their jokes. I am gonna try to push through very quickly because there's about an hour's worth of material here. I want to leave a lot of time for questions at the back if that's possible. I will ask your indulgence. If you have any questions, please move on to them. Please, make a quick note on one of these handouts and we'll try to come back to all of them. But if you get me off track with a question, we may never finish this class. So the origins of Halloween, I thought it would be good for me to start with just my own personal experience. When I was a kid, Halloween was trick-or-treating, dressing up in a costume. For me, that was frequently lucky. Monsters were a second, superheroes were always the thing. Going out after dark with your parents, which is something that was very rarely done. And yes, try to remember this. So people should see the slides. Okay.
That's what I'm trying to get back to.
The most frightening costumes, by the way, I've seen this year. I saw some frightening jack-o'-lanterns, and one of them says that you're no longer able to navigate because your computer is performing an informal function. It has that message carved into it. So jack-o'-lanterns, spooky nights, and it's just a fun holiday. And as a kid, I never thought a whole lot about where it came from. I did not like being scared as a kid, but I did end up liking Halloween because there was a lot of fun infused in the scary imagery. And I never thought a whole lot about where it came from until I got into high school and junior high. And at that point, I started meeting kids who went to my school, who went to different churches. And they said, Halloween is evil. Halloween is the devil's holiday. And if you go trick-or-treating, that's pretty much the same as worshiping Satan. I wasn't sure what to do with that, but kind of asked my parents and they didn't seem to be as concerned as these kids were. So when I got into high school and college, there was another thing that I started running into, and that were messages like this one that I found online. Silly Christian, your calendar is pagan. All Christian holidays, this idea says, were originally pagan holidays, and they were stolen by the Christians in an attempt to stamp out the old pre-Christian religion of Europe. I looked into that one and I found out that there's a fair amount of truth to the idea that these names come from pagan traditions. The names of the week, May Day, etc. These do come to us from pre-Christian Europe. There are some though, like Easter and Valentine's Day, that definitely are not pagan in origin. They are very much original to Christianity or drawn out of Judaism. And then there are a couple where it's really kind of complicated. And the kind of complicated one that I wanted to focus on, of course, was Halloween. Now, the other thing I heard, the third thing I heard was, no, this is just a Christian holiday. This is All Saints' Day, which is what All Hallows Day means. And Halloween is just the eve before All Hallows Day. And I also heard All Souls Day, and back then I had no clue. Were All Saints Day and All Souls Day two names for the same thing, or were they two different days? What was the relation? I did not know, and I didn't have the sense to ask a Catholic friend at that time. So you may have had some of this confusion too. But what I thought we would do would be to take one of these, and if you haven't picked one up there, they're on the back table here, a checklist. And in the checklist, we're going to kind of go through and we're going to look at all of these different things, and we're going to see what the different origins of these are. And the first, and we're going to see, of course, whether they're Christian, whether they come from Celtic paganism, whether they come from Roman pre-Christian religion, whether they are satanic, or whether they're purely secular. So the name Halloween, as far as I could trace it back into the 3rd, 4th century, you had, and I did not find the Greek name, but I found the Latin, Missa Omnium Sanctorum, which literally means the day of all the saints. And what that meant was the day that we honor all of the martyrs, all of the people who have died for their faith. Now, this was mostly known in Latin for a long, long time, but when Christianity came to the British Isles, we started getting names translated into Old English. And the Old English for All Saints' Day is Hallowmas. Hallow is saint or holy, as in our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So something that we are making holy is hallowed. Someone who has been made holy is a hallow or a saint, and I'm not sure what Deathly Hallows are. That's Harry Potter, and I'm not sure. But the evening before Halloween is Hallow-even, which even is just an old-fashioned way of saying evening or eve. And over time, they started saying it, contracting it a little bit, dropping the V and adding in an apostrophe, and then finally dropping the apostrophe for Halloween. So that name is very Christian, but it's not Christian enough for some modern Christians who would like to replace the holiday of Halloween with Jesus-ween, which is, in my opinion, the worst name for a holiday I think I've ever seen. And it's they started it as a Christian gift-giving festival, and it's transformed, like evangelical holidays sometimes do, into an evangelism event where you try to bring people into the church. So Halloween, the name Halloween is just about as purely Christian as you can get. What about the date of October 31st? Why is Halloween on October 31st? Well, All Saints' Day, when it started out back in the 3rd or 4th century, was observed in different times, depending on where you lived in the Christian world. It could be the Friday after Easter, Sunday after Pentecost, or May 13th. All Souls' Day, and I said All Saints' Day is the day when you remember the martyrs. All Souls' Day is the day that you remember all of the dead who weren't martyrs. So it's everybody else day. And it was originally observed in Western Catholic churches on various days between Easter and Pentecost, and in the Eastern Orthodox Church on Fridays before Lent. And in Spanish, of course, All Souls is Dia de los Muertos, which we will get back to in a bit. Now, In the 7th century, there was a Pope, Boniface IV, who officially moved All Saints' Day. He basically said, we're not going to be worshiping this at different times during the year, depending on where you live. We're going to all worship it. We're all going to observe this on the same day, and that's going to be May 13th. And the presenting story is that this building, which is the Pantheon in Rome, which was a great pagan temple, was converted into a Christian church in 609 or 610 AD on May 13th. And so he said, okay, in honor of this, this consecration of this church, All Saints' Day is going to be May 13th from now on. And that's probably not the real reason. The real reason is probably that there was a popular Roman festival called Lemuria on that day. And it was simple just to put the two holidays, two festivals that honored dead ancestors together. And that was kind of being done anyway by the common people. Romans believed that deceased people needed to have the proper rituals to be given the proper honors. Romans were big about duty. And if your family, if you die and your family doesn't do the duty of giving you a proper burial with the proper honors and so on, then your soul can go down to the underworld, but it doesn't rest. He pops up periodically and causes trouble. And the family has to set aside a day to take care of it every year. The Romans called these unhappy ghosts lemurs. Not that kind of lemur, although there is a connection, but maybe we'll get to that in the questions. Lemurs are more like this guy who looks kind of like the Roman Jacob Barley. They were the clanking ghosts who would knock things over and make noises. And the way you dealt with it is the paterfamilias, the head of the household, would get up at midnight on 3 days, on May 9th, May 11th, and May 13th. Not the 12th and the 14th, because as all Romans knew, it's really unlucky to deal with ghosts on even numbered days. I don't know where that comes from. But the paterfamilias would get up, put on a special garment that had no metal pins or fastenings in it, hold his hand like this, and would walk backwards through the house, chanting in Latin prayers to appease the dead. And then as a final gesture, as he was walking backwards, he would spit out 9 black beans as an offering. And if the ghosts ate the offering, they were satisfied and they would go back down to the underworld for another year. If there were any ghosts who didn't take that, then as soon as the paterfamilias got done with the ritual, everybody in the house, including the servants, would get up and start beating brass pots and pans together because ghosts hate loud noise. So this was a popular festival in the Roman world, and changing the date to May 13th to kind of blend it with this was probably what was going on. One of the difficulties with saying why dates were changed when you look historically at something like Halloween is you never find a memo like, okay, Flavius Maximus, I hereby decree we're going to change this date to put these two together because it's administratively similar. We don't know. We just don't have any records. By the way, the business about the spitting out black beans when you're walking backwards, it's very useful to know because of vampires. See, if you're bothered by vampires, there's a custom that I think traces back to Lemuria, and that is that you take a bowl of black beans or maybe of rice or maybe of millet seed, which might be the best of all, because millet seed is very small, and you put it on your porch. And if a vampire comes seeking to do you harm in the middle of the night and he sees the bowl, he will be compelled to count every last grain in that bowl before he can do anything bad. And by then maybe the sun is rising and he has to flee back to his grave. See, the ancient Romans knew something that Sesame Street has taught us for years, and that is that vampires are obsessed with counting things. Questions, please. Now, in 731, Pope Gregory III changed the date of All Saints' Day again. He said All Saints' Day is going to be November 1st. The presenting story again has to do with the dedication of the church and or a conference of bishops, because we all want to remember in our holiday calendar every council of bishops there ever has been. Those are the presenting reasons. The real reason is probably that Christianity had really gotten into the British Isles at that time, and they were running into another one of these situations where there was a very popular local festival called Samhain. It looks like it should be pronounced Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain because it's an Irish word and they do that. And the last one, the idea that it's being blended with Samhain is most likely, although again, don't have a record of them saying we're going to do this or why we're going to do this or anything like that. All Souls Day bounced around the calendar for a long time. There are different days that you see changed about once a century until the 11th century, when there was a British bishop named Odilio of Cluny, and he said, All Souls Day is going to be the day after All Saints Day. That's it, no more discussion. That's the way it's always going to be, and that's the way it always has been. To this day, All Saints is November 2nd. All Saints is November 1st. All Souls, November 2nd. Halloween, the 31st. So the date, well, there was some Christian influence, although maybe I shouldn't have checked that one because the Christians were kind of playing catch up this whole time. And there was a time when the date of All Saints was the Roman date. Really, it's the Celtic date of Samhain that we use. Has anybody ever been to a Halloween bonfire? I don't think it's done. You have?
I think so.
It's not done that much in this country, but there is kind of an association, and there's certainly an association of bonfires with the Celtic holiday of Samhain. Bonfires you find all over the world. Cultures that have nothing to do with each other, no contact to do with each other, often have bonfire festivals, and they often have them at the same times of the year, and probably for the same psychological reasons. Because there are several times in the year when you're really noticing what you could metaphorically say is the struggle between darkness and light, between warmth and cold. And those are the days when summer is ending, the days when summer is beginning. And in the fall, on Samhain and in a number of other similar festivals throughout the world, you would hold a bonfire just as winter was starting, November 1st. And you would do that as kind of a gesture of defiance. It's kind of like, okay, spirits of dark and cold, we know you're coming, but we're going to light this fire to let you know that we have faith that warmth and light will return to the world. And in the springtime, you have a similar festival, which in Europe is sometimes known as May Day or Walpurgis Day or Beltane. And that's when you say to the spirits of darkness and light, ha, told you so. Summer is here. Other bonfires, well, let's see. Now, there's another possible origin for bonfires associated with Halloween. Have you ever heard the rhyme, remember the 5th of November, of gunpowder, treason, and plot? I know no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Yes, Guy Fawkes Day. Guy Fawkes was the man who tried to blow up Parliament with gunpowder and failed. And the British thought that was noteworthy enough that they have a special day every year to remember it. And Guy Fawkes is generally burned in effigy. But the night before is Guy Fawkes Night, which is also known as Bonfire Night, which is November 4th. And on that night, you have a lot of bonfires. It's very, very close to the November 1st date when you would be having bonfires already. And so it really kind of made sense to people to have another at that time. So bonfires do have possibly a secular reason in Guy Fawkes Day, but there's also this pre-Christian Celtic influence. Now, there's another thing that has to do with fire and light, and it has to do with a phenomenon, a mysterious phenomenon that we find the world over. I'm sure there is a scientific explanation for it. I don't know what it is. I've heard a number of things suggested. But sometimes when you're out alone at night, especially in boggy areas, you see these little floating balls of light in the distance. And if you try to follow them, you never find them. And they're called by a number of names throughout the world. In Mexico, it's the brujas, witches. In England, it's hobby lanterns, which doesn't mean you're making lanterns for a hobby. It's hob as in hobgoblin. They can be called pixie lights, will-o'-the-wisp, fairy fire. In Ireland, in particular, they are called jack-o'-lantern because there was this guy who was called Stingy Jack. And Stingy Jack was a wicked man. He's always tricking people, conning people, and he even was successful in conning the devil at one point. When he died, he went to heaven, but he was not welcome, he found, because he lived such a wicked life. So he said, well, I'll just head down to hell then, I guess. And got there and he found that door was closed to him too, because the devil said, I remember you tricking me. You're not welcome here. You have to wander the earth. Stingy Jack said, well, can I at least have some light to see my way by if I'm going to wander the earth? And the devil tossed him a coal out of the fires of hell, and Jack took a turnip he'd been planning to have for dinner and scooped out the insides, dropped the coal in, and cut out little face marks, and you got the first jack-o'-lantern. And for my money, a turnip jack-o'-lantern is a lot creepier than the jack-o'-lanterns we're used to. That's just creepy. The Irish brought the story of Stingy Jack and his lanterns over to America in the 19th century. And when they got here, they made this marvelous discovery. There are these vegetables that work even better than turnips. So jack-o'-lanterns are definitely a Celtic tradition. Are they connected with the old festival of Samhain? Some people say yes, but again, we've got no real evidence for this, so it's hard to say. I put that one down under Celtic, but as I said, we don't know how far back it goes. We don't know how integrated it was into the festivals or anything like that. Now, of course, costumes are a big deal in Halloween. And costumes or masks are a way of concealing your identity or of, in some ways, becoming another person. In fact, these are Greek drama masks, and they are called the dramatis personae, because our word person comes from the Greek word persona, which is mask. So if you put on a mask, you're putting on another persona. You're becoming another person. And the audience then will be able to tell who you are. And that's not just Greek drama. You can find it in places like Japanese No. You can find it in the Italian Commedia dell'arte. You can find it in the Opicacina dancers. You put on the mask and you become something different. Now, these days, we put on masks and we become something different. We've obviously got different rules because these are different even than when I was a child and the whole face is exposed, because safety is a big concern these days. We usually don't go for really symbolic or religious imagery with our costumes. They could be popular characters from movies or TV shows. They can be superheroes or princesses. They can be the baby shark. They can be all kinds of things. And you can tell what's popular by looking at the Halloween costumes. Halloween costumes are mostly for kids in the modern era, but they're also for adults. And the rule for Halloween costumes is that they need to be scary, funny, or sexy. So we have here the very humorous plague doctor costume, the very scary witch, and the sexy man being abducted by an inflatable alien. They're designed to provoke response, and the response is supposed to be one of delight or excitement or fun. Now, these costumes are not quite as fun. These are old style costumes. There's a tradition in the United Kingdom what they call guising. And this is where costumes and Halloween seem to come together. And that was you put on clothes to make yourself look like a ghost or make yourself look like usually a scarecrow or a dead person, and you would go around. Guising may not go back any farther than the 19th century. It could go as far as the 16th century. We have no idea if there was anything like this done in ancient times, although you certainly will find Halloween websites that tell you it goes back to the pre-Christian religion. So costumes, well, even though it's a universal thing, the association of dressing up for Halloween does seem to come from the British Isles. So I put that one down as Celtic as well. A specific costume is the ghost, which are terribly frightening creatures, as you can see. And there are a couple of reasons for this. If you go back to the Roman festival of Lemuria, the Lemuria was one of 2 days in the Roman calendar when you would honor the dead. Lemuria is when you would honor the angry ghosts of unhappy ancestors, and Feralia, February 21st, honored the happy ghosts of ancestors who had already gotten their honors. In Christian tradition, All Saints and All Souls are about the good souls. So we're not worried about appeasing ghosts so much, but we are interested in honoring the souls of those who are before us. Now, there's an interesting thing about ghost costumes. In Greek drama, you would wear a blank white mask if you were playing the ghost or the soul of a dead person. In a little later tradition, when they stopped using masks as much and started using makeup, you would just do your face in white face makeup like this. And white face symbolized a person who was dead. And there's a theatrical tradition. If you know anybody who does white face makeup, you may find that there's a tradition that as soon as the white starts to go on, the performer will not speak any longer until they've washed it off again, because of this ancient theatrical custom that the dead do not speak. And so characters representing dead people do not speak, which is why mimes don't speak. And it's also why white-faced clowns like this guy, this makeup is called Pyro makeup, and Pyro clown traditionally will not speak. Now there are white-faced clowns who do speak. They're not very traditional. And when you're selling hamburgers, I think maybe you've got to speak a little bit. So, but as I said, that's not terribly traditional. So there are both Roman and Celtic roots for dressing as ghosts. The other way to represent a dead person is to dress as a skeleton. And Halloween uses skeleton costumes, skeleton decorations. You would think that Halloween has the corner on this, but there's another market that does it even better. And that's the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, or which is another way, as I said, of saying All Souls Day. And there are just lots and lots and lots of skull decorations, skull-shaped candy, skull makeup, carved skull masks. These are all just really wonderful religious traditions that come out of this day. Now, this may trace back to some, and I think there are more and more people looking at this and saying this comes out of indigenous Mexican pre-Columbian culture, that this is something that comes from the Aztecs and from the other indigenous peoples who were here before the Spaniards got here. And I think the tradition of carving these large wooden face masks, I think that has been traced. Again, we don't know a whole lot about the pre-Columbian stuff because what records there were didn't survive the Spanish occupation. And so we have to do a lot of reconstruction to try to figure this out. We do know a lot about another connection to skeletons, and that is called the Danse Macabre. In the 15th century, the Black Plague swept across Europe, and it killed about a third of the people. So it was just absolutely devastating and had a profound effect on people's psychology as well. One of the things that started showing up in art was the idea that, because European society was very stratified, kings and nobles, and then common people way down below, and they were thought of as almost different kinds of being, as if nobles were a higher kind of human being. And in paintings, when you look at them, they almost look like two different species of creature. The Danse Macabre reflects the idea that that swept through Europe, that no, people are not that different. When you're faced with death, it doesn't matter, young or old, strong or weak, rich or poor, male or female, you're all exactly equal in the face of death. And so they made these paintings and composed pieces of music, and they all have to do with all these people dressed in the costumes of all kinds of different walks of life, united in perfect equality, dancing with skeletons, dancing with death. And that idea is certainly carried over into Dia de los Muertos, where a lot of the stock characters in Dia de los Muertos are arrogant rich people who now have died and have really been brought down and pegged and become figures of ridicule. So the Dia de los Muertos, or the Danse Macabre, was really a thing in art. So this is really a secular development in Halloween. Fairies in Halloween, we tend not to think nearly as much of fairies as a Halloween thing. Fairies for us are Tinkerbell and Disney fairies. And Disney fairies come out of 18th and 19th century fairy tales, but there are older tales that trace back to the British Isles, and I'm going to be saying some Gaelic words, and fortunately David is here to help me if I go horribly wrong in these pronunciations. Please chime in, because I will. In a lot of Europe, there's a kind of a memory. You can read this if you read the Irish Book of Invasions. You read that Ireland was governed by people who weren't really the same as human people in ancient times, and there was a series of invasions. And eventually those people made way for the humans who populated Ireland. And they went into these little hills, they're called sheep, and they're burial grounds. But they're also viewed as gateways to another world. And that's the world of the fairies that sits alongside our own. It's very much like what we in science fiction you call a parallel universe. The creatures who live there, well, the most popular name for them throughout all of Europe, the French names caught on, fairy and fae. In the Germanic countries, the name elf caught on. In some very specific places like Cornwall, they got called pixies. In Ireland and Scotland, they got called the East She, or the Dina She, which are, yes, David.
In the north, Scotland are two distinct groups of Celts. The northern Celts are Brythonic. No, some are Brythonic, some are Gaelic.
Okay.
The southern Scots are all Brythonic.
Okay.
And there are two distinct groups of Celts. I don't do rubbish, I know, but they're.
Well, these people who are called the East She or the Dina She are the ones who live in the magical underworld, and there's some ancient traditions about that. And one of them is that if the veils between the worlds get very thin, you can pass over and in doubt in their land, or they can pass over and in doubt in our world. The veils are thinnest near these burial grounds. The veils are thinnest at twilight. The veils are thinnest at the times of the year when winter is bleeding into summer or summer is bleeding into winter. In other words, Samhain or Beltane. And so you get a lot of stories there. And you notice midsummer and midwinter you get some stories like this too, which is why Shakespeare's most famous play about fairies is A Midsummer's Night's Dream. Because that's the time when you're going to meet these guys. And there are a number of places that will say on Samhain people would dress up in disguises so that they wouldn't be recognized by the Dinashi, and they wouldn't be abducted or messed with or anything like that. And that's plausible, but we don't have any record of people doing this. So maybe it's certainly Celtic, but we don't know beyond that. Another thing that may be traced to the fairy tradition are black cats. A lot of suspicions about black cats. They can be considered very lucky, very unlucky. One of the superstitions I found that I really thought was interesting is if you're on a ship, you want to have a ship's cat, because in the days of wooden sailing ships, you had rats and mice, and they could be very destructive to the cargo or even to the hull of the ship. And so a ship's cat was good luck, and you always wanted to take care of the ship's cat. And it was considered especially lucky to have a black cat on the ship. Now, if you're in port, David?
When you, certainly in my time when you got married, in the British Isles, the bride is given a model of a black cat
Cool.
to carry. And it's believed that if a black cat passes the wedding group, it's a sign of prosperity, very good luck, and lots of children.
That, we're gonna get to
So
something
black
like that,
cat
that I
is
think
big-
connects to what you're saying perfectly down here. The one I found especially interesting with ships was if you're at port and a black cat hops up on your ship, that's good luck. But if the black cat hops back down and leaves,
Get off the ship.
get off the ship, because black cats know when ships are gonna sink. There's a Welsh verse that I found that kind of underscores what David was saying. A black cat, I've heard it said, can charm all ill away and keep the house wherein she dwells from fever's deadly sway. There's also a Scottish belief, I don't know whether it's northern or southern, but in the Cape sheep, it's a creature that takes the form of a cat, a black cat with a white patch on its chest, but it's as big as a dog. And there are two stories. One is that it's a fairy creature, and the other is that it's a human being who's learned a magical skill. And the human being can change into a cat 8 times and then change back. But if he changes the 9th time, he stays stuck as a cat for the rest of his life, which is where the story of cats having 9 lives. Cats also got associated with the witchcraft panic, and we'll get more into that in a minute, but there are basically 3 ways that cats show up in the transcripts of the witch trials. One is that the devil could take the form of a black cat to try to seduce a witch or a person into becoming a witch. The devil could give a person the power to change themselves into a cat, or the devil could give a person a demon familiar, a demon to help them in their magic, which would take the form of a cat. Familiar could also be a black dog or a toad or all kinds of creatures, but black cats are especially succeed. There's a theory, and I have no idea if this is right or not, but it sounded interesting enough I wanted to include it. A theory about why cats in particular might have gotten this kind of strange reputation, its association with magic and luck. And that is that cats are really about the first true indoor pet. People domesticated a lot of animals, but those animals were usually kept in a barn. Even dogs were usually kept in kennels in old times. But cats were inside, they were sleeping on the furniture, they were climbing up into bed with people. They became very physically intimate with people. And people would develop very strong emotional bonds, then as now, with their cats. And there's a particular stereotype that the woman of the house would develop very strong bonds with the cat, because men were often traveling around the country. And I see a couple of nods, yes, ladies of the house who love their cats. And the man would come home and the woman would be saying sweet things to the cat, stroking the cat's fur. The man would get jealous and say, this cat has bewitched my wife and is stealing the affection that belongs to me. We don't know for sure, but it's an interesting theory. Maybe it's true. The other is that they really are up to something. They look cute to fool us, but they're plotting all the time. So black cats, there is some Christian background, there's some, there's some Celtic background, there's some secular background. We're not entirely sure. Then there are witches, and witches, I'm gonna hit the high points, but this is a difficult topic to cover well. It would really take at least one session all by itself, because it's very complicated. There are several things that the word witch can mean. It can mean a very unpleasant woman, which is kind of a prejudicial thing, but that's one of the ways it's entered into the modern English language. It can be a person who is part of the Wiccan religion and practices herbalism or magic as part of that religion. Or it could be a woman who's thought to have magical powers. I'm going to say that there are, well, the word traces all the way back. We found a couple of Indo-European roots for this word, which one of them has something to do with sorcery and religion. One of them has something to do with seeing or knowing, and one of them has to do with bending, winding, twisting. And you can see how any of those might have some sort of connection. Well, those go down into Old English where there are two words, vice and vicha. You notice I'm saying them as if there's a CH there. That's because in Old English, a double C is a CH. It makes the same sound as RCH. And those are the masculine and feminine words for a person who uses magic. Then there's the word vice, which is the practice of magic, the practice of witchcraft, which is also Old English and is a gender neutral term. That comes down to modern words. There's the word witch, and the word witch, when you get into modern usage, it gets confusing because the modern word witch is used in a number of ways. I'm going to distinguish between witch as a term that's used by anthropologists to describe a certain kind of folkloric creature, and Wicca to describe people who are followers of a modern revival of ancient religion. And there's a difference between, one other thing you might notice is there's a little bit of a struggle reappropriating even the name, because as we see with the Old English, the term would have been pronounced not Wicca, but Vicha. And modern folks reviving the word did so not realizing that. And also Viche was the general practice, and Vicha was the individual practicing, but they say Wicca is the general practice and Wiccan is the individual practitioner. So there are some changes, but then that's something that happens with language over the centuries. Meanings and contexts shift. Now we've got two people here who could be called witch in modern language. There's the Wicked Witch of the West. This is completely non-historical. It's a folkloric character, and it's something that shows up in lots and lots and lots of cultures. It's something that shows up in Aboriginal Australian cultures, in African cultures, in North and South American cultures. It's not just a European thing. The word is European, but the idea that when you're having trouble, when crops are failing, when cattle are dying, when cows won't give milk, when you're having really bad weather for a long period of time, when something bad is going on, it's a common cultural assumption to say somebody is doing this to us, and we need to find the person who's guilty and blame them and drive them out, punish them, so that we can get things back to normal. And the person who this falls on in folklore is what the anthropologists would call the witch. This is somebody who's made a pact with supernatural powers and is using those powers to cause harm. Very, very different than what the Wiccan faith does. The Wiccan faith says we are simply a different religion, and we are a religion that has a lot of positive values. We value the roles of women. We value care for the environment. We value egalitarianism, and we want to stand up to colonialism and oppression of every kind. And when we do what we call magic, we do it for the benefit of the community. This, a lot of the reason these terms are tangled have to do with what's called the witchcraft illusion, which it actually did not exist in the Middle Ages. It showed up from about 1450 to about 1750. There was an idea in Europe that there were a lot of changes going on, and a lot of them were bad changes, and that they must be the fault of someone who was working against. And of course, you know, in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, there was a lot of rapid social change because the whole systems of thought, science, technology, economics, everything was changing very rapidly. And rapid change makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people get frightened and they try to scapegoat. There were two Jesuit guys. They did not do this officially for the church, but they kind of took it on themselves. They said, we've got witches all over the place causing harm. So they went through the Germanic countries where they lived, and they collected all of the folk tales they could find about witches, and they compiled them into a book called the Malus Maleficarum, which means the hammer of witches. And they said, here, all of this stuff must be literally true because we collected it from folk stories in villages across the land. And we would like everybody to use this as an instruction manual. Here's what witches are, here's what they do, here's how you find them, here's how you stop them. And it led to a very tragic period in history where tens of thousands of innocent people were accused of an imaginary crime, persecuted and punished, and often killed. It's an area that historians continue to study and find out more about. But it's kind of a very common story among Wiccans to say the witch trials were an attempt by the Christian clergy to stamp out the old religion by doing away with its priestesses. But it doesn't seem to line up historically. There were some early historians like Margaret Murray and James Fraser, who was Golden Dawn, who believed this. But since about the 1970s, people have done a lot of work actually going in and reading the transcripts of the witchcraft trials. It doesn't look like that's what's going on. It doesn't look like there was any real active pagan presence in Europe during these years, because I mean, it started pretty late, 1450s, and they've never found transcript. They found people saying all kinds, accused witches saying all kinds of things. Some have said, I'm innocent as my malicious neighbors. Some have said maybe my neighbors are the witches. Some have said, no, I am a witch and I made a pact with Satan. All kinds of things, but they have not found a single trial where somebody said, no, I am the priestess of a pagan religion, and this is them trying to persecute me. So it's historically somewhat unlikely, but it's complicated. And it's a matter of ongoing historical scholarship. And if it turns out that it's absolutely not historically correct, well, there are things in pretty much every religion that are not absolutely historically correct. And it's what those stories have to teach us, I think, that says something about us. And in the case of Wicca, these stories teach them that intolerance and persecution are very bad things and must always stand up against them. And I think that's a good thing to learn. So witches, because the Old English is where the word comes from, I'm going to say is Celtic. Then there are bats, very popular decoration. But there's only one reason why bats are part of Halloween. It has to do with something that Theodore Rothke talks about in a poem. By day, the bat is cousin to the mouse. He likes the attic of the aging house. His fingers make a hat around his head. His pulse beat is so slow, you think him dead. He loops in crazy figures half the night among the trees that face the corner light. When he brushes up against the screen, we are afraid of what our eyes have seen. But something is amiss or out of place when mice with wings can wear a human face. Vampires. Vampires are spooky creatures. Vampires are associated with bats. Since spooky creatures in general and vampires have become associated with Halloween, so have bats. This might surprise you, though. Western society, European society knew about vampires long before they knew about vampires and bats. This guy, Desmodus rotundus, he's a pretty guy, isn't he? This is a New World animal. This is an animal that was found in Central and South America by Spanish and Portuguese explorers in the 15th and 16th centuries. They'd never seen anything like it before. This guy has sharp little teeth, and he will come down onto the neck of a cow or a sheep or an alpaca and make a little, very small incision with his very sharp teeth and lap up the blood. Unless he's got rabies, he doesn't do much harm. It's really kind of negligible, taking a very small amount of blood from a large animal. They would even bite humans on occasion. But it really captured the imagination because for centuries, the Europeans had had these legends about blood-sucking monsters. Now, for the first time, they found an animal that was a blood-sucking animal. So the two just stuck. And they said, okay, we know what we're going to call this bat. He's a vampire bat. And the vampire became more and more inextricably linked until there was a novel, 1893, by a guy named Bram Stoker. The novel was Dracula. And in Dracula, it really kind of cements this relationship. I pulled up a couple of passages from Dracula. You can see Dracula can control many creatures, including bats. And Dracula can take many forms, including the bat. So here's a creature that enters Halloween for entirely secular reasons. Then there's the devil, or devils. Now, does anybody know who Jack Chick is? Never seen Chick tracks? That might be an interesting ADG sometime. Jack Chick was an evangelical cartoonist who put out lots and lots of pamphlets in the 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s. He would draw these comic books that would talk about how we're living in the last times, and because we're living in the last times, Satanism is on the rise, and so is human sacrifice. Halloween started with the Druids. And you can tell that this guy is a British Druid because he's holding an Egyptian hunk for some reason. And these Druids would do human sacrifices to honor the devil on Samhain, which was October 31st. They would go from house to house and they would abduct people for human sacrifice. And then they would leave a jack-o'-lantern at the house entrance to show that they had taken a victim from there. There's absolutely no foundation for any of this. But Jack Chick was more interested in scaring people into becoming Christians than he was in getting his backs right. David.
the Romans virtually wiped out the Celtic Druids. Not because of evil or anything like that, but because they were priests. They were not, they were priests. And the Romans said, you will worship only Roman gods. Not only that, the Druids encouraged rebellion.
And the Romans did such a thorough job wiping out the Druids that it's very hard for us to say much historically about the Druids to this day. And they're still continuing to make new archaeological discoveries about them.
There are still Druids in Wales, by the way.
Okay, cool.
There are still Druids.
Bring one of those in for ADG. Now, this guy, you might know, he was a California celebrity, Anton LaVey. Does anybody know that name? Yeah, he was the founder of the Church of Satan up in San Francisco. And as you can tell, he had a flair for theatrics. He started out his career as a lion tamer in the circus. And he had kind of a sinister looking face anyway, but he did his best to really groom himself up with the eyebrows and the beard and make himself look as sinister as possible. And carrying snakes was just one of many ways that he liked to shock people. There's a quote from Anton LaVey that was popular among evangelical churches. Anton LaVey said, "I am glad that Christian parents let their children worship the devil at least one night out of the year. Welcome to Halloween." It's a way of proving that Halloween was the devil's holiday. After all, if the founder and leader of the Church of Satan says that, it must be the case. There are two problems with that. The first is there's no evidence that he ever actually said anything like that. The second is it's probably very unlikely he would have said anything like that, because for all of his talk about Satan and all his founding of the church, he was an atheist who did not believe in God or a literal devil at all. He was a disciple of a follower, an admirer of a woman named Ayn Rand, who wrote some books like The Fountainhead, The Shrugged, and it was her philosophies as expounded in those books and other writings. These were philosophies that basically said true virtue is self-interest. That really what people call selfishness is really just people being honest about taking care of themselves. And altruism, generosity, charity, these are phony values. They're hypocritical because people don't really put other people ahead of themselves. That's unnatural. So if somebody is showing off how altruistic they are, they're a big phony, and you need to distance yourself from them. LaVey thought that was a wonderful philosophy, and he wanted to kind of celebrate it in his life because while he was not religious, he loved religious ritual. He loved the drama of it and the pomp. And so he made a religion that would put in rituals into this secular philosophy. Now, it's easy to blend other religions with Christianity in ways that make it look like there's something that they're not. Fantasia does this. Does anybody recognize this picture? Yeah. Who is in this picture? Can anybody tell me? Who is this big winged guy?
I was thought it was the devil.
And in fact, in the introduction to that, Walt Disney says Satan himself, but he uses another name right before that. He said this is the legend of Chernobyl. It comes from Ninebald Mountain by Modest Mussorgsky. By the way, they got an actor in to do all the modeling of the gestures for Chernobyl. They hired Bela Lugosi. So they definitely knew what they were trying to show. But Modest Mussorgsky was a Russian composer, and he wrote this, and then it was, I think, arranged by Rimsky-Korsakov. And he is telling a story about Chernobyl, which is a legend. Chernobyl literally means the dark god, the black god. And Chernobyl seems to have been, there is a bald mountain, by the way, and I've seen pictures of it, and it does not look this dramatic. It looks more like a big hill. But there's a legend that once a year, Chernobog comes to hold court over demons and ghosts, and he is a spirit of darkness and cold. He is basically the personification of winter. And so he has this rebel on Bald Mountain, but then Yellowbog, which means the white god or the bright god, arrives, and light and warmth win for the rest of the year, and Chernobog has to go back down into the mountain, and summer comes. So this is not really the devil. This is an old Russian legendary figure that originally had nothing to do. It was not even really a god of evil, just a god of winter. But it's very easy for us to make those connections in our minds. How often have we seen? Has anybody seen the Disney version of Hercules? The big villain in there is Hades. Hades is the god of the underworld. And so Hades is this big demonic looking guy with fire for hair and the voice of James Woods. It's hard to get more sinister than that. But in Greek mythology, Hades was actually one of the nicer gods and the easiest to deal with. We Christians, we think, okay, he's the god of the underworld, that must make him like the devil, and so we present him as being like the Christian devil. You know, we kind of fold our own ideas into these things after the fact. So devils involved in Halloween, that's very much a Christian idea. Now, haunted houses, to understand haunted houses, you have to look back at written in the 1790s. It had, the night before Guy Fawkes Day was a bonfire night, or it was sometimes called mischief night. People would do pranks. Sometimes little pranks, usually little pranks. But mischief night made it over with the immigrants in the 19th century. And because we didn't have Guy Fawkes Day over here, they switched it to a few days earlier. They put it the day before Halloween, the night before Halloween. And it became known by a number of names. In Michigan, it's called Devil's Night. In the 80s, it was associated with a lot of arson. The community finally figured out how to deal with that. In some places, it's gate night, because that's the night you leave your neighbor's gate open and their livestock all get scattered. It can be mat night, when people steal your doormat to swap it with one of your neighbor's doormats, or moving night, when they do the same thing with your patio furniture. It can be goosey night, and that's because people are acting goosey, which I guess is a technical term. And it can be cabbage night, because people go and they pick rotten cabbages that have been missed in the harvest, and they use them to pelt people's houses and people. And also, if you take a cabbage and you examine it very closely, you will learn what your true love is supposed to look like. Most pranks are pretty harmless. TPing houses, soaping windows, egging cars. Some are more serious. Probably the biggest practical joke, whether it was meant to be a practical joke or not, happened on October 31st, 1939. Orson Welles broadcast the Mercury Theater on the Air's version of the War of the Worlds, and there were thousands of people convinced that civilization was coming to an end because the Martians had landed. People got fed up with the prank nature back probably around the 1930s. And they created this, a lot of communities started creating haunted houses as a way to deal with it. They said, if we give people a non-destructive way to celebrate, they'll spend all their energy here, and they won't go out and TP and fake alien invasions and stuff like that. So they created haunted houses. And that seems to have helped, because the pranks went down, and more peaceful things like trick-or-treating went up. However, even though haunted houses achieved a positive social result, they were considered evil by some within Christianity. In the 1970s, some Christians with the backing of Reverend Jerry Falwell, who was the founder of the Moral Majority, decided we need to have a Christian alternative to haunted houses. So they created the Hell House, and there are hell houses to this day, hosted by some evangelical churches. And the Hell House is kind of like the haunted house, except the Hell House, you go in and you see little vignettes active. And the vignettes are usually young people who are being tempted by Satan into doing really wicked things like drinking or premarital sex or homosexuality or abortion. And then, of course, these young people die and are dragged to hell where they suffer the torments of the damned eternally for this thing that they just did. This is a picture of Satan presiding over a same-sex wedding. And of course, these two guys are going to end up in eternal torment in the very next scene, because this is Reverend Falwell's vision of wholesome fun. Hell houses are not my favorite thing. In fact, I think if anything in Halloween has actually done damage to people and communities, this is it. So, haunted houses, there's a secular version, there's a Christian version. Apples, I'm going to go through apples very quickly because we're running a little behind. But there are a lot of candy apples, caramel apples, bobbing for apples. This is another way, by the way, you can find out what your true love will look like. If you bob for apple and catch one, you sleep with it under your pillow and dream about and apple cider. And part of this is just that apples are being harvested at this time of year. There's a story that you see on some of the Halloween websites that this had to do that the Roman goddess Pomona. There really was a goddess Pomona, and she was the goddess of apples and tree fruit in general. And she had a festival on November 1st. And when the English came to, or when the Romans came to England, they brought apples. They also brought the worship of Pomona, which featured bobbing for apples. Great story. It's not true. Pomona was the Roman goddess of apples. She did not have her own festival. There's no historical link between her and bobbing for apples. And there's no connection between Celtic holidays and Pomona at all that we know. Apples do have connections to a lot of stories. Even though the Bible never identifies the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the Middle Ages, they were pretty sure it was an apple. The reason for that is because in Latin, the word apple is melon, and the word for evil is malum. That's not coincidence. God's trying to tell us something there. This is in Nordic mythology, the goddess Idun helped gods stay eternally young by giving them her apples. In Greek mythology, there were the golden apples of the Hesperides, which were one of the great treasures guarded by the daughters of Atlas. And at one point, the goddess of discord stole one of these apples, and she wrote "to the fairest" on it. And she went to a gathering of the gods, and she threw it into the middle of a group of goddesses just to see what would happen. And they all began saying, "To the fairest, oh, it must be mine, oh, it must be mine, oh, it must be mine." This led to the Trojan War. We'll try. That's probably none of those have to do with the association of apples and Halloween. They probably have to do with Irish stories about the silver branch. The silver branch supposedly comes from an apple tree in the Celtic otherworld. It was brought by a beautiful woman, and it shows up in a couple of Irish sagas. It either had 3 apple blossoms on it or 3 golden apples, and the human prince who received it would try to find the tree that branch had come from, and thus find the princess who brought it, and that would be his trip to the underworld. There's also another connection here. There's in English stories, in the legend of King Arthur, when King Arthur is killed, he's taken to the island of Avalon, which is and his body lies there until the time when England will need him again, rise up and lead the country in this hour of greatest need. Avalon is an English word. It comes from the Latin insula Avallonis, which comes from the Welsh, which I'm not even going to try to say. David, would you please? Ynys Aflach. YNYS
Aflach.
Thank you. Thank you. Best I probably could have done was say Aflac.
That's right.
Anyway, it means the island of fruit or apple trees. So connection of apples is Celtic. Trick or treats, well, the only earliest we know about people going house to house and asking for treats is the tradition of soul cakes, which is all Souls Day sort of a thing. Soul cake is on your menu sheet, by the way, your recipe sheet. And it was a sweet treat that was baked for All Souls, and solars would go around and they would offer prayers and songs at the houses, and then they would receive these treats. In Italy, there was something very similar. It was Ossa del Morte, del Morto, the bones of the dead. And then we have Calavera de Azúcar, sugar skulls, Dia de los Muertos. And then, of course, we have the extravagant word that is the modern Halloween. So treats, there are many treats. There's an Irish fruitcake called barmbrack, which seems to be associated with something. There's soul cakes, which are Christian. There are fava beans, which go back to the black beans of Lemuria, Roman paganism. There's pumpkin pie, that's told by a classmate from Kentucky, that's the way it's pronounced, pumpkin pie. There's kokanen, which I believe is usually made with potatoes. This one is made with turnips, which is kind of a nice connection to the original jack-o'-lantern. There are the sugar skulls. They're purely secular candy, like that perfect candy, cotton or candy corn. I did not find any Satanist foods, but I did throw in double eggs in there. So, is Halloween Christian? Not really. There's an All Saints Day that is Christian. There's an All Souls Day that is Christian. Halloween is something else. Is it satanic? Yeah. That's just, it's just not.
To the Celts, it was known as the first night of winter.
Yep.
The first night of winter.
And does it come from Celtic paganism? Well, lots of it does, absolutely. Does that mean that Christians stole Halloween? It's possible, but it's probably more complicated. It's likely that there was a natural blending of traditions over a long period of time. People trying to keep the old and embrace the new. It's called syncretism by scholars. It really bothers people who are absolute religious and cultural purists because they don't want foreign stuff coming in, contaminating our stuff. But it happens all the time. Some people want to recover Samhain because they like the Celtic origin. Some people want to have a reverent All Saints Day. Some people want to have a festive All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos. And most people just want to have a safe and wholesome family holiday with a little spooky fun. I think the calendar will allow all of this. Yes, ma'am.
I would argue that you could put a jack-o'-lantern on the Christian or skeletons.
Okay.
In the Middle Ages, people used to have skeletons on.
Can you hear that?
No. You're saying in the Middle Ages, people used to have skeletons
On gravestones.
on gravestones.
And also there were these, I forget what you call them, places where priests would keep skulls.
Yes, there were ossuaries.
Yeah, that's
Where the bones of the dead were kept. And yet, you're absolutely right. And certainly if you go to Paris, these are enormous ossuaries there in the catacombs.
I mean, memento mori is what they said, you saw skull. I think that's
Right. Memento mori is basically, you show them the skeleton and you say, all are mortal. So reminder of your own mortality.
Matthew,
Any other questions?
Matthew,
John here.
So, Matt,
John,
Did you prepare all the visuals for that presentation?
Did you prepare all the visuals for this presentation?
Yes.
Very good.
That was a lot of work.
That's a very professional job. Thank you.
Right, well, excellent, superb.
Thank you.
Next Sunday, Frank, you have arranged for this presentation next Sunday.
Yeah, just briefly, we will, coming to us from Rochester, New York, is Reverend Myra Brown. She is an African-American pastor of a largely Anglo church, but she's been actively working to end racism, both in her own church and in the city of Rochester. So she has an interesting history. And in addition, a year ago, when the troubles, if you will, came to Rochester following the George Floyd, and locally there, the Daniel Crude murders against the police, she and her anti-racism coalition were very active in that. So she's been quoted in the national press, written up in a number of articles. And so I think she'll be an interesting speaker to hear about, what are the approaches and strategies to defeat racism? How has she been working in that direction, as well as her personal experience?
Thank you. All right, we're running late.
Yeah, if there's one more question, I can probably take one and then I've got to run.
So if Satan was to take a holiday, isn't that a good thing?
What's that?
Your first side is, attributed that it was Satan's holiday.
Yeah, that Jack said it's Satan's birthday, which is interesting because there's no story anywhere of Satan being born.
But our modern conception of a holiday is that you're taking a break, you're taking time off.
Right.
So if Satan were to take a holiday, wouldn't that
It's a
be
good thing.
That would be a good thing. That actually sounds like it might make a decent Hollywood movie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.